Why do so many historically great competitive Pokemon have such low usage in Gen 9 OU, like Rotom-Wash? Rotom-Wash is one of the most consistently good competitive singles Pokemon ever. Rotom-Wash is a Pokemon that proves that stats are not everything. This Pokemon has pretty below average stats actually, but it gets by thanks to its elite combination of typing and ability. Rotom-Wash is an electric water type, which by itself is pretty good, but not that amazing. But when you add Levitate to the mix, it becomes absolutely incredible. Levitate grants a ground immunity and immunity to entry hazards, which is amazing in its own right, but the fact that it also erases your weakness to ground that you would have from your typing is unbelievable. Rotom-Wash is only weak to a single type, grass, is neutral to many things, and has some incredible key resistances. It's also offensively potent, despite not having the most amazing offensive stats, just off the back of a reasonably good 105 special attack, and the stab combination being so great. Rotom-Wash is able to get a lot out of Volt Switch, a strong pivoting special attack, more so than most, because the ground types that would stop Volt Switch and be immune to it are threatened by Stab Hydro Pump significantly, creating a very harmonious combination. Rotom-Wash also has Pain Split, which is usually a rather unremarkable healing option, which just averages both your HP and the enemy's HP and sets them to the same value. But because Rotom-Wash has such a low base HP, it can actually use this incredibly well against a lot of key defensive targets. And of course, Will-O-Wisp is a fantastic tool on a Pokemon with such consistent defensive entry points. Rotom-Wash is one of the best Pokemon of all time at just spreading burn, a very high impact status ailment. It has so many opportunities to click Will-O-Wisp, and it's pretty difficult to stop it from doing so. This is a fundamentally excellent Pokemon, able to defensively check a plethora of different things without being too passive either, outputting reasonable amounts of offense and getting significant progress with its burn spreading. So what's the deal? Because in Gen 9, Rotom-Wash is ranked in the UU tier, which means that it is below the usage threshold to be ranked OU. That's actually quite surprising, I think. This means Rotom-Wash has a usage in OU lower than 4.52%, which is very low. Could it be because of a lack of respect for cleanliness and a disdain for the washing machine as a device? I don't think so. That would be ridiculous. Very useful device, the washing machine. Could it be because of a growing distaste for artificial intelligence and the concept of a sentient washing machine filling people with dread? That's more likely, but I don't think that's quite the reason either. Why don't we investigate this? I want to make it clear that just because a Pokemon has low usage doesn't mean that it's bad. I actually think Rotom-Wash is still quite good in Gen 9 OU. All of the advantages it has always had still have plenty of merit. Rotom-Wash matches up very well against Great Tusk, Iron Treads, King Gambit, certain Dragonite sets, and only being weak to one type and also having Spike's immunity is just always nice to be a good neutral check to a lot of things. And that's always good for a Pokemon's consistency. I certainly think you could use Rotom-Wash in Gen 9 OU and be quite pleased with the results. I believe a big reason why Rotom-Wash has declined in usage is the loss of one of its key options, that option being Defog. Access to Defog was previously one of Rotom-Wash's greatest strengths. It was a Pokemon that could remove hazards from the field while also having incredible defensive strengths, and even a reasonable amount of offensive firepower and momentum. Rotom-Wash was a no-brainer to throw onto teams, because it was this beautiful package of defense, utility, and momentum. Without Defog, it is offering less, which means it's a bit worse, and I suppose this has an impact on its usage. Don't get me wrong, Rotom-Wash has functioned alright in previous generations without access to Defog, and its other advantages still have merit, but this is a factor. Rotom-Wash did get nerfed in this sense in Gen 9. Perhaps falsely so. I think a Rotom-Wash with Defog would be appreciated in this metagame. I wish it kept it, but alas, it has lost it, and this is a bad thing for it. I also think another factor that is affecting Rotom-Wash usage is the presence of Alomomola as a competitor. Alomomola is a new superstar of Gen 9. OU for the first time ever in this generation thanks to its combination of the solid mono water typing, the ability Regenerator for consistent healing, and the options of Flip Turn, Scald, and Wish. Scald is more scarce in Gen 9, so it's able to take advantage of that key option, Spread Burn, and dish out good water damage at the same time. An outstanding move with plenty of historical weight that is now chiefly abused by Alomomola in Gen 9 OU. This is the Scald Pokemon now, primarily. Flip Turn is a great form of pivoting. There's a water-type physical attack with 60 power that pivots you. And Wish and Flip Turn work very harmoniously together, as you can Wish to heal an incoming Pokemon significantly thanks to your high HP stat, and then Flip Turn to actually pivot to the Pokemon you want to heal. The combination of Wish and a pivoting move are very good together. Now, Rotom-Wash does have some advantages over Alomomola, but in the past, the claim to fame for Rotom-Wash was that it's this bulky water-type guy that can pivot really well with Volt Switch. That was one of the things that made it stand out. But now there is this other bulky water-type that can pivot that is generally a bit better to run on most teams. And since a lot of teams are running Alomomola, you can't really run both Alomomola and Rotom-Wash since they fill the same space on a team. Alomomola walls many of the same things, it is also a pivot, and it also spreads burn. But Alomomola has way more longevity thanks to Regenerator healing it constantly so it sticks around way longer, and it also has Wish to literally heal up teammates. And these traits are stronger most of the time than what Rotom-Wash offers. Rotom-Wash can be used if you want a more aggressive Pokemon for the short term with a pivoting move that deals more damage and also access to Will-O-Wisp, which is directly applying burn, a bit more of a consistent way to apply a burn. But for most teams, Alomomola is going to be preferred. I think you can also factor in the presence of Ogerpon Wellspring as a reason for Rotom-Wash's decline. A little bit. Ogerpon Wellspring is a fast water grass type physical attacker that is immune to water thanks to its ability Water Absorb. Rotom-Wash is not capable of switching in and walling this powerful physical threat, as it usually can with most other physical water types. The fact that this is a water-grass type, and grass is the only type that Rotom-Wash is weak to, is a problem. And it's a problem that this is probably the premier physical attacker, or one of them, in Gen 9 OU right now. Now, actually, one of Rotom-Wash's advantages is that it can Will-O-Wisp Ogerpon Wellspring on the way in, which is actually more of a threat than Alomomola can achieve against Ogerpon Wellspring. Alomomola also matches up poorly there. But generally, Alomomola chooses to just run a teammate that covers the Ogerpon Wellspring matchup rather than trying to threaten Ogerpon Wellspring itself. And to be honest, Rotom-Wash would probably have to do that too. Despite being able to Will-O-Wisp Ogerpon Wellspring on the way in, that's not a play that's always going to work out. And also there is the problem of actually having to answer it when it's on the field, so Rotom-Wash would still need a teammate. And at that point, why not just run Alomomola? It's worth noting as well that you can Volt Switch against Ogerpon Wellspring, whereas Alomomola cannot Flip Turn against Ogerpon Wellspring. But still, even factoring in that, the superior longevity and support provided by Alomomola tends to outclass Rotom-Wash. I suppose you could also factor in the presence of Kyurem, who switches in and threatens Rotom-Wash pretty nicely. Kyurem is more popular in Gen 9 OU than any other OU format. In Gen 8 OU, the Pokemon is banned. In Gen 7, it's a bit more niche. In Gen 9, Kyurem is one of the most prominent offensive threats, so the presence of Kyurem is a factor that affects Rotom-Wash. Kyurem resists Hydro Pump, doesn't mind taking a Will-O-Wisp on many of its sets, and threatens Rotom-Wash with a super effective Freeze Dry, which is one of the few things that can actually threaten Rotom-Wash that's not a grass type attack. So even though Rotom-Wash is not bad, and it has a lot of things to be appreciative of, it is a blessed creature in many ways, it does make sense why its usage has declined in OU. It's got competition from others, it's been slightly nerfed, and also the metagame is a bit more adversarial to it than usual. And all of these have combined to result in a lower usage for Rotom-Wash. I don't think it's impossible for Rotom-Wash to rise back up to OU depending on the metagame conditions. It still has plenty to be thankful for, and it does a lot of things better than Alomomola, depending on the pace of the metagame or what teams might require as things shift. Rotom-Wash could rise back up to OU, I could see that, but at the moment, and for much of the lifespan of Gen 9 OU, it has had much lower usage than usual. And also people are frightened of a sentient washing machine. That accounts for at least 1% of the decline in usage. Another competitive superstar that has seen significantly lower usage in Gen 9 OU is Garchomp. Garchomp is also not ranked OU in this generation, which is unheard of. Garchomp has been OU in every single past generation. In fact, in Gen 4 it was Uber. This is one of the more shocking developments of Gen 9, and it's one that hasn't changed. Earlier on in the generation, when Garchomp initially started to fall, I had faith that this was just a temporary trend and it would rise back up and return to OU rank, and equilibrium would be restored and all would be right with the universe. But no, it has failed to return to above that usage threshold, regrettably. What has happened for Garchomp? Why is Garchomp so much less popular in Gen 9 OU? Historically, Garchomp is excellent thanks to its high, well-rounded stats, great offensive typing, and consistently good tools. It is a Stealth Rock setter that is bulky enough to set Stealth Rock and tank incoming hits. While doing so, it's fast and threatening enough to also dish out some good damage, and its move pool is varied enough to threaten various important things. Garchomp has always been a Pokemon you can't go too wrong with, and the ability Rough Skin also comes up quite often and is quite good, punishing enemies for making contact by dealing chip damage to them. You could run Swords Dance on Garchomp, mixed attacking Garchomp with Fire Blast to hit physical walls with low special defense. You also have Draco Meteors, another mixed attacking option. Garchomp even got buffed in Gen 9 with the new option of Spikes to its moveset. A significant new tool. I think just like Rotom-Wash, this is another case where competition is a big factor. Garchomp is competing with a lot of other ground types in Gen 9 OU. The ground type role is becoming a bit crowded. And Garchomp has always been competing with Landorus, Therian, and Gliscor in other generations, and these guys are still in Gen 9. But Gliscor in particular has gotten so much better in Gen 9, to the point where the competition is a bit fiercer. Gliscor also gained Spikes, and it got better by proxy, thanks to keeping Toxic where a lot of Pokemon lost Toxic. That's a big deal. And Gliscor also benefits greatly from Poison Heal, granting status immunity. Another rare trait in this generation that enhances its defensive merit compared to other bulky ground types. Gliscor also gets a lot out of the new terastallization mechanic, as becoming a different defensive type, paired with the excellent defensive ability Poison Heal, has extreme value. It's one of the strongest things to terastallize on. There's also the offensive Terranormal Facade sets that are noteworthy too. So Gliscor just feels way better in Gen 9, and that's a big problem for Garchomp. But it's not just the Gliscor and Landorus Therian it's competing with. Garchomp could probably manage if those were the only forms of competition, because it has done so in the past. Garchomp stands out from these two options with its unique typing and rough skin and options that they don't have. But now we have Great Tusk, who is probably the biggest competitor. Great Tusk is the king of all bulky offensive ground types in Gen 9 OU. Great Tusk is just so desirable, so excellent, with its access to the key Rapid Spin for hazard removal and speed boosting. This option alone is so much of the reason you use Great Tusk, but it also has knockoff for that item removal and dark coverage. It happens to have Ice Spinner alongside Headlong Rush, which is perfect coverage and hits important things in the metagame. Other similar ground types do not get the option of Ice Spinner. And Great Tusk also has other set variety. It has bulky sets with Body Press. It has Stealth Rock itself. It has Bulk Up. It has access to the Booster Energy. It has the Sun Boost with Protosynthesis for Sun teams. It's hard to argue with Great Tusk's dominance in this field. There is also Iron Treads, who is very similar to Great Tusk, but with a ground steel typing, higher speed, and options like Volt Switch and the special Steel Beam sets. Iron Treads has maintained an OU position with a higher usage, where Garchomp hasn't, thanks to these options, plus it also has Rapid Spin. There's also Ting-Lu. Ting-Lu is an interesting one. It's the most passive of all of these bulky ground types, but also the most defensively potent. Ting-Lu's bulk is immense, with ludicrous defensive stats and the ability Vessel of Ruin, which reduces the enemy's special attack stat. Ting-Lu's move pool may be limited, but it has Stealth Rock, Spikes, and Earthquake, and much of the time that's all you really need. It also has Whirlwind to phase out boost sweepers and rack up spike chip damage, and it has Ruination, which is the same effect as Super Fang, and Nature's Madness, halving the enemy's current HP, allowing it to do a bit more and leverage its bulk for some offensive progress. All of this competition is probably the biggest reason for Garchomp's fall off. Garchomp previously was a dominant ground type. It was consistently a top 3 ground type in the format in multiple generations of OU. Now it is a lower end ground type with all of these elite ground types to compete with. Some of its old adversaries have gotten better, and it has these new ground types that feel better on most teams. Where Garchomp stands out among these is with its access to Rough Skin, and it often leans into that, stacking the contact punishment effect with Rocky Helmet as well, which also punishes enemies on contact. And you run a bulky Garchomp set like this, with Stealth Rock Spikes and Dragon Tail to shuffle enemies around, as this move forces them to switch. And the Dragon ground typing does have genuine defensive merit over other typings like the ground flying and the dark ground that Garchomp is competing with. But even though this set has merit and is quite good and can work on the right team, it is more of a niche alternative to those Pokemon rather than an elite centralizing metagame defining force, which is what it used to be. As far as offensive Garchomp sets go, you can still run those, and Garchomp can take pretty good advantage of the new Loaded Dice item, along with Scale Shot. Scale Shot is a multi-hit dragon type attack, hits 2 to 5 times with 25 power, and it also raises your speed after you use it at the cost of -1 defense. And this can be a genuinely excellent threat, as after a Scale Shot boost you do outrun a lot of things, and Dragon and Ground have always been a pretty complementary stab combination. Earthquake does good neutral damage to fairies and is super effective against steels, making it very complementary to Dragon typing, which is nice neutrally versus many things. This set does have its problems though. It is very weak to Corviknight. Fire Fang is your best physical fire move, and that's quite a weak move. Corviknight can probably stomach that and also 1v1 you reasonably well, especially when you have a defense drop from the Scale Shot. This Garchomp set absolutely hates Iron Valiant, because Iron Valiant carries the booster energy, granting it a speed boost on switch-in, and this speed boosted Iron Valiant can outrun you even if you have the Scale Shot boost, so that's another thing stopping this from being too threatening. And also the fact that you have -1 defense after using Scale Shot does leave you open to priority moves like King Gambit Sucker Punch and Dragonite Extreme Speed. The set is good, it can work on the right team, but it does not hold the candle to more consistent offensive threats like Dragon Dance Dragonite, for example, or even King Gambit. I also think a factor in Garchomp's declined usage is the absence of Ferrothorn, which may seem like a strange thing to say. Ferrothorn is not in Gen 9 OU, and I think actually this is bad for Garchomp, because one of Garchomp's greatest strengths in the past was being a physical attacking ground dragon type that is actually good against Ferrothorn. Ferrothorn is usually able to wall Pokemon like Garchomp, especially dragon-type physical attackers. Ferrothorn has incredible defenses, resists dragon, and can shrug off neutral physical damage well and just 1v1 you easily, but access to the mixed coverage option of Fire Blast was especially good against Ferrothorn, who is times-4 weak to fire and gets hard punished by that. Garchomp having this option was key, and without Ferrothorn in the metagame, who is always ubiquitous when it is present, this great tool in Garchomp's toolkit is no longer very useful. This would be a genuine reason to run it over other ground types if Ferrothorn was present. But without Ferrothorn, this is still an okay option, but not nearly as useful as it once was. Garchomp is still a good Pokemon that has a solid place on certain teams, of course. Some might even think it's a bit underrated and overly maligned in Gen 9, but its decrease in usage does make sense given the circumstances. I think another interesting case is Pelipper. Pelipper is a bit different to the examples mentioned so far, because it wasn't always amazing in competitive, but ever since Gen 7, when Pelipper received the ability Drizzle, it skyrocketed in viability and competitive relevance, being firmly ranked OU in Gen 7, and one of the strongest and most centralizing Pokemon there, and the same is true in Gen 8 OU. So why in Gen 9 has Pelipper fallen off? No longer ranked in OU, below that key usage threshold. If you're not aware, Pelipper's ability Drizzle is incredibly strong, one of the best abilities in the game, shared with Kyogre. This ability simply sets rain on the field when you switch in, and rain is one of the strongest weather effects. There's a lot to appreciate about rain. It boosts the power of water-type attacks, which are strong attacks to begin with. It also activates many synergies like Swift Swim and Rain Dish, etc. Rain teams have historically been the best of all weather archetypes. If you're going to go all in on a weather team, Rain is usually your best bet. Water types are powerful already. It's not bad to stack multiple water types in the same way that it's bad to stack multiple fire types. Not only can Rain teams take advantage of Swift Swim sweepers with their incredible speed in the weather and the offensive onslaught that comes with that, but also enhancing water-type wall breakers like Ash, Greninja, Crawdaunt, Keldeo, etc. has historically been very strong as well. I think you can also give some credit to Pelipper itself for being a pretty decent Pokemon beyond just the Drizzle. Don't get me wrong, it's not amazing or anything, but it is a cut above the other option that OU formats have had, Politoed. Politoed was previously the only Drizzle Pokemon available in OU, and Politoed is a little bit more limited. Pelipper, on the other hand, has access to the Stab Hurricane option, which is actually amazing. Hurricane has perfect accuracy in the rain and is an incredible attack. Pelipper also has great utility options like U-Turn to pivot, Knock Off to remove items, and Defog to remove hazards. This is a far more useful Pokemon than Politoed ever was, beyond its rain setting. Yes, it is primarily just a rain setting button, but it punches above its weight surprisingly well, considering its poor stats and how much it's carried by its ability. It actually has pretty good tools to take advantage of the weather it sets, and nice utility to support its teammates. So what's changed in Gen 9 OU? Why is Pelipper so much less popular? Well, the pecking order has shifted when it comes to weather, as rain is no longer the #1 type of weather in the game and has been usurped by sun. Sun is now the most powerful weather effect in Gen 9. And I think that there's one clear thing we can point to that is the reasoning behind this, and that is the introduction of the past paradox forms to the game. The past paradox forms of Gen 9 all have the ability Photosynthesis, which is an ability that grants a boost to your highest stat in the sun. And the presence of a bunch of Pokemon with this ability has solved one of Sun's greatest issues, and that is the fact that most Pokemon that abuse Sun are fire types or grass types. And this fact leaves your team vulnerable to some serious defensive shortcomings, especially if your team consists of multiple fire types. All of those fire types are weak to rock and get defeated easily by Stealth Rock. They are also weak to the very common ground and water, and if you're up against an enemy rain team or a sand team, you're going to have struggles. These two weather effects not only erase your sun, but have a lot of Pokemon that match up well against your sun threats. Many chlorophyll Pokemon also rely on Solar Beam specifically, like Venusaur, as their chief offensive option. This is a great move in the sun as it bypasses its charge effect, but if the enemy ever overwrites the weather and replaces sun, they actually get stuck charging Solar Beam, because you replace the weather before they execute Solar Beam. This means that one of the key offensive options of Sun teams is inherently risky, whereas Rain teams do not carry as much risk, with water moves that are often decent to throw out anyway, even if the weather gets replaced. It's also worth noting that prior to Gen 9, there were no chlorophyll Pokemon that were fire type, so you can't take good advantage of the sun increasing the damage of fire type attacks when your chlorophyll threats are not fire types themselves and don't have the stab bonus, whereas water types with Swift Swim are very common. A Pokemon like Kingdra can deal incredible damage by just spamming Hydro Pump or Surf in the rain. It's a lot defensively better than comparable chlorophyll Pokemon or sun threats, and all of this just made rain so much more consistent than sun. But now we have the Photosynthesis Pokemon, and these are not fire types. They all have different kinds of typings. With a more wide variety of different Sun abusers to choose from that offer different things to your teams, Sun teams have become far more consistent because they're not as reliant on Pokemon that have these defensive shortcomings. A key addition is Walking Wake, who is a Water Dragon type. It's almost like a Sun version of Kingdra, but it's even stronger than Kingdra was because Walking Wake has the powerful move Hydro Steam, which is a water type attack that gets buffed in Sun, flipping the weather mechanics on their head a little bit. Walking Wake also has great stats and a strong move pool outside of this. Flamethrower being a key option to also have fire coverage that is boosted by Sun. There is also Great Tusk and Raging Bolt and even Iron Moth, who is a future Paradox Pokemon, but can work well on Sun teams too, thanks to it being a fire type threat. So Sun teams just have a bunch of new powerful Pokemon that synergize in the Sun that solve a lot of the problems Sun teams used to have. Another factor that is making Rain teams a little bit worse in Gen 9 is the simple presence of Ogerpon Wellspring. Ogerpon Wellspring is one of the top tier physical attackers of Gen 9 OU. You see it constantly, it is extremely common, and this is a Water Grass type Pokemon with Water Absorb. The fact that there is such a common Pokemon with Water Absorb that you're going to see constantly is a real issue for Water type attackers in Rain. In the past, it was extremely spammable to just hit Surf or Hydro Pump or Flip Turn in the Rain or Liquidation. These were spammable moves that could be resisted, but the sheer power of the stab, plus a choice item, plus the Rain boost was able to power through things oftentimes. And there were relevant Pokemon that had water immunity, like the occasional Gastrodon, but no water immune Pokemon has ever been as ubiquitous as Ogerpon Wellspring. Ogerpon Wellspring is a far more popular Pokemon than any other historical example of a water immune Pokemon, and this is a real detriment to Rain teams, whose whole thing is spamming water moves. It also doesn't help that Ogerpon Wellspring is fast, and is also a grass type with a strong Power Whip to threaten directly many of the Rain threats that are being used on these teams. Ogerpon Wellspring is the single most adversarial Pokemon to the Rain archetype that I think we have ever seen in the history of OU. I suppose you can also factor in the recent rise of Tyranitar back up to OU status, returning to the metagame a little bit more than it has in Gen 9 OU historically. And Rain teams have always had to contend with Tyranitar in the past, but having a good, strong Pokemon that can reset weather and end your Rain, that also has a high special defense, probably doesn't help an archetype that's already struggling. So this is a recent development that's bad for them. I also think you can factor in the new move Chilly Reception on Galarian Slowking, which is a pivoting move that switches you out and also sets snow on the field. This move is strong for its pivoting effect alone, but the fact that it also resets the weather is bad news for Rain teams. Galarian Slowking, another very popular option that just has this very easy way to remove rain. And this is bad for Sun teams too. They don't like having their Sun overwritten by snow either, but as I said, Sun teams have a lot more going for them to counterbalance that. Sun teams are particularly powerful right now, so all of their other advantages sort of counterbalance that, whereas Rain teams feel like they're suffering a bit more, I think, from these common options that can reset weather, competition from Sun more than ever, and also the presence of Ogerpon Wellspring shutting down their main game plan. So all of that is compounded to give Pelipper a surprisingly low usage in Gen 9. Who knew that this great Drizzle Pokemon, which is an ability that is evergreen, that is always amazing to have, could fall so far down in usage? I do think that in future OU formats, Pelipper will probably rise back up again. I doubt they will bring the Photosynthesis Pokemon back. This is a particular metagame where Sun is at an all-time high, and also Ogerpon Wellspring is the devil for Rain teams, but I sort of doubt that those particular Pokemon will return to Gen 10. Maybe Ogerpon Wellspring will, but I would think that the Paradox Pokemon are exclusive to Gen 9. I actually don't know. It's possible they aren't, but it would make sense to me that they shake up the metagame a little bit by removing those metagame-defining Pokemon that are designed for Gen 9. And I'm sure Rain will probably return to its former glory again in the future. But for now, Rain is at an all-time low, and Pelipper is suffering greatly for it, feeling once again like the mere simple pelican that he was for so many years prior to Gen 7. The godlike ability to summon rain from the heavens has given Pelipper a serious ego problem. It is necessary for him to remember where he came from and feel like a worthless pelican again, to fully appreciate the power bestowed upon him by the great Poseidon, to summon rain at will. So I think that this is a good lesson for Pelipper to learn. And I hope in Gen 10 he comes back stronger than ever. And in Gen 9 we have also seen a historic decline in Toxapex usage, which is remarkable. In Gen 7 and Gen 8 OU, Toxapex existed and was an absolutely elite defensive Pokemon. One of the most overtuned defensive Pokemon ever created. Toxapex has everything going for it. A water poison typing is quite strong defensively. It has the ability Regenerator, which is an immaculate ability, restoring 1/3 of your HP every single time you switch. Toxapex, unlike other Regenerator Pokemon, has very good defensive stats. 152 physical defense, 142 special defense. It may have a bit of low HP to counterbalance a little bit, but that's a small price to pay for such excellent defensive stat values. It hardly matters. Toxapex is an extraordinarily bulky Pokemon with all these traits, the strong typing and the stats and the ability. And you may think that its limitation would be its move pool then. Maybe they counterbalance this by giving it a limited move pool, but no, Toxapex actually has, in Gen 7 and 8, a ludicrously good move pool. It has Recover, as if it needed any more healing. It has Scald, which is a strong water type attack that can spread Burn. It's very difficult to switch in against. It has Knockoff, which can remove items, and it's very difficult to stop a Toxapex from removing your items. That's a tough one. You also have Haze as a way to eliminate stat stage changes, which may not be as good as Roar usually, but on Toxapex, it's good enough to leverage your defensive stats and stonewall things, including offensive sweepers. You even have Toxic Spikes as a solid entry hazard that can apply significant pressure. This rotten beast is one of the banes of my existence. I hate this creature. Pokemon are supposed to have downsides. They gave Toxapex every single thing in the world. Strong move pool, good typing, elite ability, and high stats. It would seem impossible for Toxapex to ever fall off with all of these incredible traits. So how is it that Toxapex has decreased in usage? What have we done to deserve this great blessing, this beautiful shift in the ecosystem, and a return to equilibrium for the universe? Well, the reason is simple. Toxapex was severely nerfed in Gen 9, rightly so. They looked at Toxapex and said, we gave this too many things, let's remove some of its things. And that, I think, is what should happen in the world. If you have too many things, they should take some of them away from you. Toxapex lost its key option of Scald, which was probably the biggest loss for it. Scald was its bread and butter, the ability to spread Burn, sit there and be a defensive nuisance, never dying and spamming Scald, but eventually burning everything. So that's great. Toxapex also lost the key option of Knock Off. Now without Knock Off to come in and very easily remove items, which was especially good in Gen 8 when Mega Evolutions were no longer present, without this option, Toxapex can do far less with its defensive entry points and feels a lot more passive. The removal of these two options was a severe nerf to this Pokemon, and enough for its usage to absolutely plummet into the dirt. I also think you can factor in the presence of Alomomola here, just like we did for Rotom. The presence of Alomomola is another factor in why Toxapex has fallen so greatly, because Alomomola feels like a better choice on most teams. Alomomola does have Scald. It has good stats and a good typing and regenerator, much like Toxapex. And it has Flip Turn for the key momentum and pivoting, as well as Wish. So Alomomola's defensive benefits can be leveraged for genuine utility, momentum, and progress, where Toxapex's cannot anymore. Now, Toxapex was not nerfed so hard to be completely unusable in OU. You still see it occasionally, usually on hard stall teams, where its very high defensive stats are more appreciated. It still has the option of Toxic, which is actually a more scarce option in Gen 9. They cut Toxic from a lot of movesets, so Toxapex still having this is a big deal. The poison typing is good, as it offers fairy and fighting resistance, poison immunity, and also the ability to remove toxic spikes. These are advantages over Alomomola, and the fact that you have Haze and toxic spikes yourself, as well as the direct recovery of Recover, are also factors. This set is very passive, but some teams can afford to be passive if they're all in on that passivity and are stally. But Toxapex's days of being throwable onto any old balanced team are numbered, as it has been usurped by Alamamola, who is in some ways similarly frustrating, but I would say it's not nearly as frustrating as peak Toxapex was. I, for one, am glad that Toxapex has fallen, and you see it so scarcely, and when you do see it, you're not so worried, because the options that made it so frustrating are no longer there. I believe this is worthy of a celebration. Gen 9 OU is a very unique metagame in the history of competitive singles, where a lot of mainstays of the game have had their roles questioned, significant shifts have left them outclassed, or not as central as they once were. The moveset adjustments and the presence of new metagame-defining forces have also shifted around the tides of power a little bit in competitive singles. Some of these are welcome shifts, some not so much, but always interesting to talk about, I think, and evaluate why some Pokemon that seemed immune to power creep actually did end up falling off in Gen 9 for reasons perhaps out of their control.